Most people think all quails lay the same number of eggs. Small birds, small cages, simple feeding, easy money. That is what almost every beginner believes before they start. But what if I told you that choosing the wrong quail breed could quietly cut your profits in half without you even realizing it? And even worse, there's one breed that looks productive on the surface, but ends up costing beginners more money than it makes. This is where most people get it wrong. Because quail farming is not just about raising birds. It is about choosing the right system from the very beginning. And in a space where margins can be tight, one wrong decision can turn what should have been a profitable small farm into a frustrating experience. Now here's the truth. Quail farming is one of the easiest entry points into raising farm animals. You do not need large land. You do not need expensive structures. And you definitely do not need years of experience. That is why so many people are turning to quails as part of their backyard livestock systems. Whether it is a small setup behind the house or a growing homestead animals operation, quails offer something very few farm animals can. Speed. They grow fast. They mature quickly. And most importantly, they start producing eggs in just a few weeks. But here's the problem nobody talks about. Not all quails are created equal. Some breeds are built for efficiency. Some are built for survival. And some are simply not worth your time if your goal is profit. And this is where beginners make their biggest mistake. They choose based on availability, or appearance, or what someone casually recommended, instead of choosing based on actual performance and long-term returns. So in this video, we are going to break down the 3 most profitable quail breeds for egg production, not just based on theory, but based on real, practical outcomes for people involved in farm animal care, backyard livestock, and small farm systems. And as we go through each one, you will begin to see something interesting. Each breed has its strengths. Each breed has its weaknesses. But one of them stands clearly above the rest when it comes to serious profit. And most beginners completely overlook it. Let's start with the first breed, the one almost everyone begins with, the Japanese quail, also known as Coturnix quail. If you've ever looked into raising quails before, chances are this is the first breed you came across. And there is a reason for that. Because when it comes to small farm animals and backyard livestock setups, the Japanese quail is one of the most beginner-friendly options available. They are widely accessible. They are easy to manage. And they adapt well to different environments. For someone just stepping into the world of raising farm animals, this makes a huge difference. You are not dealing with complex systems. You are not dealing with fragile animals. You are dealing with a bird that is built for simplicity. And then there is the biggest advantage of all, speed. Japanese quails grow incredibly fast. In just about 5 to 6 weeks, they are already laying eggs. Think about that for a moment. Most farm animals take months before you start seeing returns. But with this breed, production begins almost immediately. That is why so many beginners get excited. Because it feels like a quick win. And in many ways, it is. A healthy Japanese quail can lay between 250 to 300 eggs per year. That is almost an egg every day. For a small backyard livestock setup, that level of consistency can create a steady flow of production, and when managed properly, that can translate into daily income. Now, let's talk about farm animal care, because this is another area where Japanese quails stand out. They do not require complicated feeding routines. They consume relatively small amounts of feed, and they are generally resilient when kept in clean conditions. For beginners trying to balance time, cost, and effort, this matters more than people realize. Because the easier your system is to manage, the more likely you are to stay consistent. And consistency is what drives results in any farming system. Now, from a profit perspective, this is where things get interesting. Let's break it down simply. You have a bird that starts laying early, produces frequently, consumes relatively low feed. At first glance, this seems like the perfect setup. And that is exactly why so many people stop here. They assume this is the best option. But here is what most people do not tell you. There is a hidden limitation. The eggs are smaller. And in many markets, smaller eggs mean lower prices. So even though production is high, the value per unit is not always as strong. And over time, that begins to affect your overall profit, especially if you're trying to scale beyond just a small household setup. Now, this does not mean the Japanese quail is a bad choice. Far from it. In fact, for beginners entering backyard livestock or small farm animal systems, it is one of the safest starting points. It allows you to learn. It allows you to build confidence. And it allows you to understand how quail farming works without taking huge risks. But if your goal is long-term profitability, you have to start thinking beyond just ease and speed. You have to start looking at value. And this is where the next breed begins to shift the conversation. Because while the Japanese quail focuses on speed and simplicity, the next breed introduces something different. Balance. A balance between production and value. A balance between resilience and profitability. And a balance that many farmers only discover after they have already spent time with their first flock. This brings us to the golden quail, also known as the Manchurian quail. At first glance, it does not look dramatically different. It is still small, still manageable, still suitable for backyard livestock systems. But once you start paying attention to performance, you begin to notice the difference. Golden quails are slightly larger than Japanese quails. And that size difference matters, because often translates into slightly larger eggs. And slightly larger eggs can mean better pricing in the market. Now here is where things get even more interesting. Golden quails are known for their hardiness. They tend to be stronger, more adaptable, and better suited to varying environmental conditions. For anyone involved in farm animal care, this is a major advantage, because fewer health issues means fewer losses. And fewer losses means more consistent production, which ultimately means more reliable income. Now think about this from a small farm perspective. You are not just trying to produce eggs. You are trying to build a system that works over time. A system that does not collapse under small mistakes. A system that can grow with you. And this is where golden quails begin to stand out, because they offer a level of stability that many beginners overlook. Now, let's talk numbers. Golden quails may not always match the absolute peak egg count of Japanese quails, but they often come very close. And when you combine that with slightly higher egg value, the difference in profit begins to close. In some cases, it even surpasses it. But here is the part that surprises many people. When farmers start tracking real outcomes, not just assumptions, they begin to notice that golden quails often perform more consistently over time. Less stress, better survival, steadier production, and all of this adds up, because in farming, consistency is often more valuable than extremes. Now here is something most beginners miss. They focus too much on maximum output. They ask, which bird lays the most eggs, instead of asking, which system makes the most profit over time. And those are two very different questions, because a bird that lays slightly fewer eggs, but survives better, adapts better, and produces more valuable eggs, can actually outperform a higher producing bird in the long run. This is where experience starts to separate beginners from serious farmers. And this is where golden quails quietly earn their place. But even with all of these advantages, even with better balance, better resilience, and stronger long-term performance, there's still one more level. Because there is another breed, one that takes everything we have discussed so far and pushes it even further. Bigger birds, bigger eggs, higher value, and a completely different approach to profitability. This is where things start to get serious. And if you have made it this far, you are already ahead of most people trying to get into raising farm animals. Because what comes next is the difference between hobby farming and building something that actually scales. If you have made it this far, then you are already ahead of most beginners. Because most people never get past the basics. They stop at what is easy. They stop at what is common. But the real advantage comes when you start looking deeper. When you stop asking, what works? And start asking, what works best over time? Because that is where profit lives. And this is where everything begins to change. Now, we are stepping into a different level of quail farming. Not just raising birds for small daily returns, but building a system that can actually scale. This brings us to the third breed, the Jumbo Coturnix quail. And this is where things get serious. At first glance, it may look similar to the Japanese quail. But once you understand what is happening beneath the surface, you begin to realize this is a completely different category. Because the Jumbo Coturnix is not just bred for survival, it is bred for size. And in farming, size changes everything. These birds are noticeably larger, heavier bodies, stronger frames, and most importantly, larger eggs. Now let's pause for a moment, because this is where many beginners miss the opportunity. They focus on quantity. How many eggs can I get per day? But they ignore value. How much is each egg worth? And that one shift in thinking can completely change your results. Because with Jumbo Coturnix quails, you are not just producing eggs, you are producing higher value eggs. And that difference matters more than most people realize. In many markets, larger quail eggs command better prices. They are more appealing, more noticeable, more competitive. And when you multiply that by consistent production, you start to see where the real advantage begins. Now, let's talk about egg production, because this is where people get confused. Jumbo Coturnix quails may not always lay at the exact same frequency as standard Japanese quails, but they are still highly productive. And when you factor in egg size, the total value of output becomes significantly higher. So instead of chasing the highest number of eggs, you're optimizing for the highest return per bird. And that is a completely different strategy. Now, let's bring this into a real-world perspective. Imagine two setups. One farmer is raising standard Japanese quails, high production, smaller eggs. Another farmer is raising Jumbo Coturnix quails, slightly fewer eggs, but larger in size. At first, the difference may not seem obvious, but over time, the second farmer begins to earn more per sale, more per tray, more per batch. And as the system grows, that gap continues to widen. This is how serious farmers think. They do not just look at output. They look at efficiency. They look at margins. They look at scalability. Now, let's talk about something important, because this is where honesty matters. Jumbo Coturnix quails are not perfect, and this is something you need to understand clearly. They consume slightly more feed because they are larger birds, and with size comes higher maintenance requirements. So if you are careless with feeding, if your system is not well managed, that advantage can quickly disappear. This is why many beginners avoid them, because they require a bit more attention, a bit more structure, a bit more intention in your farm animal care system. But here is the difference. For those who get it right, the rewards are significantly higher, because once your system is optimized, the increased value of production outweighs the added cost, and that is where profit begins to expand. Now think about this from a backyard livestock perspective. If you are working with limited space, would you rather fill that space with smaller, lower value output, or maximize it with higher value production? That is a decision point, because space is one of the most valuable resources in small farm systems, and the way you use that space determines your results. Now let's talk about something even more important, market perception, because this is something most people ignore completely. Larger eggs are often seen as more premium. They stand out, they attract attention, and in many cases, they are easier to sell at better prices. So, it is not just about production, it is about positioning, how your product is perceived, and how easily it moves in the market. This is where Jumbo Coturnix quails gain another advantage, because they allow you to operate at a slightly higher level, not just as a producer, but as someone offering better value. Now here is something most people do not talk about. Serious farmers rarely choose based on convenience. They choose based on long-term results. They are willing to put in a little more effort if it means building a system that pays more over time. And this is exactly what the Jumbo Coturnix represents. It is not the easiest path, but it is one of the most rewarding. Now let's bring everything together, because at this point you have seen all three options. You have seen speed, you have seen balance, and now you've seen scale. But the real question is, which one is right for you? And the answer depends on your goal. If you are just starting out, if you are learning the basics of raising farm animals, If you want something simple, fast, and easy to manage, then the Japanese quail is a strong starting point. It allows you to enter the space with minimal resistance. If you are looking for something more stable, something that offers better long-term consistency, and slightly improved value, then the golden quail becomes a very attractive option. It gives you a balance between performance and resilience. But if your goal is profit, if your goal is to build something that grows, if your goal is to maximize your output from a limited space, then the Jumbo Coturnix is where you need to focus, because that is where the numbers begin to shift in your favor. Now here's a key takeaway. There's no single perfect breed. There's only the breed that fits your strategy. And the moment you understand that, everything changes, because you stop copying what others are doing, and you start building a system that works for you. But we are not done yet, because understanding the breeds is only part of the equation. The real difference comes when you see how they compare side by side, when you break down the numbers clearly, when you remove the guesswork, and make decisions based on actual outcomes. And that is exactly what we are about to do next. Now, this is where everything becomes clear, because up to this point, you have seen each breed individually. You have seen their strengths. You have seen their limitations. But when you place them side by side, that is when the real difference shows. And this is where smart decisions are made. So, let's break it down in the simplest way possible. No confusion. No unnecessary complexity. Just clear, practical understanding. Let's start with production. The Japanese quail is known for its high egg output. It lays frequently. It starts early. And for beginners, it creates the feeling of fast progress. That is why it is so popular in backyard livestock systems. You see results quickly, but as we already discussed, those eggs are smaller, which means the value per egg is lower. So while production is high, the total profit does not always match that output. Now, let's move to the golden quail. This is where things begin to balance out. Production is still strong, not as aggressive as the Japanese quail in some cases, but still consistent enough to maintain steady output. And then comes the advantage. Slightly larger eggs, better resilience, stronger survival rates. So instead of chasing maximum numbers, you are building a more stable system. And over time, that stability becomes valuable, because fewer losses means more predictable income. Now, let's look at the Jumbo Coturnix. This is where the shift happens. Production is still solid, but the real difference is not in how many eggs you get. It is in what those eggs are worth. Larger size, higher value, better market appeal. And when you combine that with consistent production, you begin to see why serious farmers lean in this direction. Now let's talk about feed, because this is where many people make wrong assumptions. Japanese quails consume less feed. That is true. Golden quails are slightly higher, but still efficient. Jumbo Coturnix consume more, and this is where beginners panic. They see higher feed consumption and immediately assume lower profit. But this is where deeper understanding matters, because profit is not just about cost. It is about the relationship between cost and output value. If you spend a little more, but earn significantly more in return, then your margins improve. And that is exactly what happens with Jumbo Coturnix when managed properly. Now, let's bring in something even more important. Time. Because time is one of the most overlooked factors in farming. Japanese quails give you fast results. That is their biggest strength. Golden quails give you consistency over time. That is their advantage. But Jumbo Coturnix give you scalability. And that is where long-term profit lives. Because when your system grows, when you move from a few birds to many, small differences become large outcomes. A slightly bigger egg across dozens or hundreds of birds becomes a major difference in income. And this is where strategy becomes everything. Because now you are no longer thinking like a beginner. You are thinking like a builder. You are thinking about systems. You are thinking about growth. And most importantly, you are thinking about sustainability. Now here's a question you need to ask yourself. What is your goal? Are you trying to learn? Are you trying to experiment with backyard livestock? Are you trying to understand the basics of farm animal care? Or are you trying to build something that actually generates income over time? Because your answer determines everything. If your goal is learning and simplicity, then starting with Japanese quails makes sense. You get quick feedback, you understand the process, and you build confidence. If your goal is balance, if you want something reliable, something that performs steadily without too many surprises, then golden quails are a strong option. They give you a smoother experience. But if your goal is profit, if your goal is to build a serious homestead animal system, if your goal is to maximize the value of your space, your feed, and your effort, then the decision becomes clear. You need to start thinking in terms of value. And that is where Jumbo Coturnix stands out, not because it is the easiest, but because it is the most rewarding when done right. Now here's the part most people overlook completely. Success in raising farm animals is not about working harder. It is about making better decisions early. Because the choices you make at the beginning determine the results you see later. And this is why so many people struggle. They jump in without understanding. They follow random advice. They copy what others are doing without knowing why it works or why it fails. But you are not doing that because you have taken the time to understand the differences. You have seen the strengths. You have seen the trade-offs. And now, you are in a position to make a smarter decision. And that alone already puts you ahead. Now imagine this. A few months from now, you have your system running. Your birds are healthy. Your production is consistent. And instead of guessing, you know exactly why your setup works. Because you chose intentionally. Because you understood the process. Because you built your system with clarity. That is the difference. And that is what separates people who succeed from those who quit early. Now here is what I want you to do. Do not just watch this video and move on. Take a moment. Think about your situation. Think about your space, your budget, your goals, and decide which path makes sense for you. Because there is no one-size-fits-all answer. There's only the answer that fits your strategy. And once you make that decision, commit to it, learn it, improve it, refine it over time. Because that is how real progress happens. Now, if you found this helpful, if this gave you clarity, if this helped you see quail farming in a different way, then this is just the beginning. Because on this channel, Herd and Harvest, we do not just talk about farming. We break it down, we simplify it, and we show you how to build real systems. Whether you are working with backyard livestock, exploring small farm animals, or building a full homestead animal setup from scratch. So, if you want to learn how to raise farm animals the smart way, if you want practical strategies that actually work, if you want to avoid costly mistakes and grow faster, then this is where you need to be. Subscribe to Herd and Harvest right now, because the next videos are going to take this even further. We're going to break down real numbers, real setups, real strategies that you can apply immediately. And trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming next. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join a growing community of people who are not just interested in farming, but are serious about doing it the right way. Because at the end of the day, it is not about having more animals. It is about having the right system. And here at Herd and Harvest, that is exactly what we are building.